la civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So good evening to you who are here in person. Good evening to the people who are following us through the web stream, and also good evening to those who are going to watch it later on. So this meeting is devoted to the Family Cultural Exhibition by Gus Powell that you can visit now during the meeting. And as a curator, first of all, I thank the meeting for the determination that was put into the organization of this exhibition. And so a connection with the contemporary photography was re-established, and that links up with the 80s. And Giovanni Chiaramonte and Luigi Ghirri were at that time the curators of the photo exhibitions. But before that, I would also like to thank the two people who made it possible to have this exhibition, Giulia Zorzi from Mi Camera, thanks to her intelligence and courage, she makes the Italian photography world less provincial. And then Tommaso Campiotti, this is the second person I want to thank, architect, who designed the space hosting Gus photos on display, and to design the space in the right way. So thank you. Thank you in particular, and thank you also to the volunteers who really built up piece by piece the exhibition space. And now let's start. Straight away from Brooklyn, New York, Gus Powell. Gus is one of the most interesting figures of contemporary American photo, and is a member of the New York Street Photography School. And there's a person to whom he owes a lot, Joel Meyerowitz, who is connected from the UK with us. Hello, Joel. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure. And when we talk about masters of photography, sometimes we exaggerate. But in his case, there is no exaggeration, so it is not an exaggeration at all. Those who know him say that he teaches not only how to look at the world, but that he's able to pass on something more, something that has to do with life in a much broader sense. By the way, Joel, in 2002, had an exhibition at the meeting in Rimini, curated by Giovanni Chiaramonte. And for the first time, the ground zero pictures were to be seen. So I won't elaborate too much, and I give the floor straight away to Gus Powell. He will tell us more about his somehow artistic pathway and how he ended up with Family Car Trouble, this great book and great exhibition. So, Gus, the floor is yours, and thank you again.
It's a very big floor, I have to say. So it's first of all, I want to say thank you to Luca and everyone from the meeting. It's been 3 days I've been here setting up, and the experience has been incredible. But at the center of it has been meeting people. And specifically, I want to thank the young people who worked to help make the exhibition of Family Car Trouble. It's been fantastic to see their energy and their enthusiasm and their collaboration. And I see that as something that's happening all across these spaces, and it's the part that I'm most excited about collaborating with. So thank you for having me here and for giving me this floor and this opportunity. I'm grateful. So I'm from New York City, and I was born in 1974. And this is me probably when I'm around 6 or 8 years old. This is the city I lived in when there was graffiti. This was the pose that you would stand to make any kind of picture. And for me, my life with photography began with the Polaroid camera. And like everything, you first photograph the things that are right in front of you. Your cat, like the cats of Instagram, but with the Polaroid from before. The events that would happen in the home. It was a license to sort of still be allowed to be around the adults, to take pictures with the Polaroid camera. And looking at the edges and the off moments right from the beginning. But a big part of my life in New York was about walking. And I had wonderful parents, but specifically my mother. We would walk everywhere in the city. And before there was photography for me, there was the simple act, not with this hand, but with this hand of pointing. To walk the streets of New York with my mother and to point at things that stood out to me. And so much of the city, and we would go to museums and everywhere, but for me, just even this idea of before you have a camera, you have a finger. And you use it to point at the things that are significant to you, to call attention to them. Look at this, look at that. And then as we move forward with photography, it's the same finger that does the work. It's this simple gesture, and yet somehow the connection between pointing and then making pictures is connected to me. Because in the act of pointing, we're saying, look at this. We're saying yes to something. And with the camera, we do that in another way. When I grew up, I had a 3-dresser drawer in my room. And the top dresser was all my hats. The second drawer was my clothes. And the bottom drawer was all garbage that I'd picked up from the streets of New York. I was obsessed with picking up things that had been crushed by the city, things that used to be 3-dimensional, but now were flat. A glove from a worker that's stuck in a gesture, a spoon. And my dresser drawer was completely full of these things. About 2 months ago, when I was in New York, I saw this basket ahead of me on Spring Street, and it was as far away as the end of this stage, but I had to run to it as if somebody else was going to pick it up before me. And these objects that had a 3-dimensional life and now have a 1-dimensional life were somehow super compelling to me. So my dresser drawer filled up with these things. And my mother was encouraging. She said, it's okay, It's one thing to collect, but now you have to learn to curate. And this is what we do with photography. We collect, and then we do things with the pictures to curate. So this early lesson from my mother, which was a strategy to get rid of all this garbage that was in my room. But she said, you can't keep 6 of these guanti, these gloves. You pick the best 2, 1 left, 1 right. You pick the best crushed can, the best spoon. But this is the lesson. We all make more pictures than we ever have. And that act for me is the best part of photography, pressing the button, using that finger. But the real work is the act of curating, choosing the pictures that have meaning and putting them forward in a way that actually communicates something. And some of this is connected to this big idea of saying yes to the world. First, you say yes by looking and responding, but then you want to transmit that yes to a bigger audience. And that's when you have to curate. The first pictures for me in New York, and this is the next translation of my experience. I went from using my hands to collect to then using the camera to collect. It's this incredible tool with film, 36, 38 exposures if you're lucky, to gather information and to bring it home with you. And so I started to use the camera to explore the world around me. Timidly, right? I wanted to take a picture of this man, but I did it with 3, 4, 6 train tracks between me, so there was no problem. I wanted to photograph girls. This is as close as I could get in the beginning. It's not real. A statue, a gesture. Again, I was hungry to photograph living people, but you choose what you can and what's within your means when you're beginning, and then you go forward from there. You start to get closer, you see a gesture, you see something. And even here, I'm getting a little closer, but I'm covering her face, not because I don't want to see it, it's because I don't want her to see me. I'm timid. So the strategy is to learn how to overcome that timidness and to grab things, and then beginning to curate the world, to not show one thing, but to show more than one thing, to show relationships in space. And for me, I divide photographs into 2 kinds. There's nouns and there's verbs. A noun shows you Beyonce, it shows you the house, it shows you the shoe. But a verb is alive, right? This is, for me, the DNA of the Winogrand pictures, of Joel's pictures, of the heart of street photography. It's to show something that's so alive, but that type of life can only be seen through photography. And so I began to get braver and to make combinations and to work quicker and to have strategies on how to use my body, how to be sneaky, but also how to be generous and present. A completely simple, boring picture. But I think all of us who work in this way, or however you work, whatever medium, you have these moments that are touchstones for you. And I remember being on the subway, and I just really wanted to take a picture of this man on the right. I don't know why, but I wanted to try. But the idea of taking a picture in a subway that's closed with someone who's just 2-3 meters away from me was so intimidating. And then I had this idea, what if I didn't photograph him? What if I photographed the space between him and the person next to him? So I raised the camera, I looked at the space, and then I raised the camera, and I took this one picture, and then I put the camera down, still looking at the space. Nothing happened. And it was like this epiphany for me, that I somehow was able to do that. And it was a small trick, and it's a simple picture, but it's an important one for me because as I've moved forward, I've realized more often than not, especially in the street, the thing I'm paying attention to is not one person or 2 person, but the singular object, both as negative space, the space between people, the plasma that we all live in. In some ways, it's the most universal thing that we're all kind of floating in. So to pay attention to that, even from a compositional way, but also in a somatic way, became something. And for me, the moment I made this picture was a lesson for that. As I moved forward in the world, I had the benefit of having many teachers, Joel being among one of the most significant. And he was very encouraging in terms of the pictures that I was making in the street. And so I had influences within photography, but I also have many influences from other spaces. At a certain point, a friend sent me Frank O'Hara's lunch poems. And this is a tiny book. It's the size of a passport. This is Frank O'Hara. And the poems that he wrote in the 1950s and early 60s were written on his lunch hour. He worked in Midtown Manhattan at the Museum of Modern Art. And the story, the legend, is he would go out to Fifth Avenue to the Olivetti typewriter showroom and put in a piece of paper and bang out a poem, have lunch, and then go back to work. And the nature of the poems it goes in two directions. They're documentary in nature. They describe life on the streets of New York, neon in daylight, people working, the news, but they also just describe what he's thinking about. So this tiny little book went into my pocket, and it really felt like a passport, something that gave me permission to both try and bear witness to little moments that happened across the day, but also to pay attention to my feelings and the balance of the two. Because the work is not, for me, it's not about trying to describe lunch in New York. It was about trying to feel something in the little bit of time that I had available to me. To look at other people working, the diversity of the city, to see the graphic nature of the space, the typology of the human beings that populate it. For me, this was like a chessboard. Pawns and rooks and kings and queens and horses, and we're all navigating this grid that's the city itself. Looking for visual rhymes. First you see the billboard, then you see the man doing the same pose that's absurd, then you see the man at the bottom echoing that pose. And to work in an additive way, first you see this crazy thing of a guy in a phone booth, but how can I have time? What else could I add? How could I put something else into the picture to make it compelling? Anytime you see somebody with flowers, you know there's a story. They're saying, I love you. They're saying, I'm sorry. They're saying, happy birthday. So I make the picture even it's bad. But for me, this was so beautiful because I saw her carrying the flowers, and the color of the flowers rhymes with the umbrella. But then she rounded the corner and she tucked it behind her back. And you knew that it's coming. Something's going to happen. There's a story that's going to follow. I didn't stay for the rest of it because in some ways, the pregnant quality of her waiting is it's more poetic to me because we wait with her rather than seeing the kiss. Sometimes the most interesting moments are before you kiss somebody rather than once the kiss happens. I'm not done. I'm sorry. So here to another moment, walking down the street, and for a moment seeing this rose rip across the eye of this man, so then going back, and to put the rose right on his eye. And in English, I'm very intentional in saying that I make photographs. The camera takes pictures, but I make photographs. If I stood 1 foot to the left, the rose would not be on his eye. If this way, it would be different. So this intentionality of seeing the opportunity to move the world, to be in collaboration with the world, to tell a story that only you see, but then through photography you can transmit towards others. I went to the Sistine Chapel. It's amazing, but it's also kind of ridiculous. These giant men floating in the sky. But then there you are on Fifth Avenue with these giant men floating in the sky. So I call this picture Putti. So that first body of work was where I learned to try and share some of my experience and then to bear witness to the experience that I saw on the street. To say yes to these little things, whatever they were, right? Because of the compression of time and space, some days something happened and other days nothing happened, but I only had half an hour for lunch one day, so you try to make a picture of anything. Another time you have 2 hours and you sneak away. But the lesson that followed was to try and make this was the next book I did, which was called The Lonely Ones. And this was a different set of pictures. I wanted to start telling stories in a different way. I had been working at the New Yorker magazine, and I worked in the photo department, but the best job I had there was trying to find photographs to go with pieces of fiction. And then I also worked on doing book jackets for publishers. So this union of using a photographic fact with a piece of fiction was something that I almost consider a little bit of like my quasi graduate school at the New Yorker. And I started making these pictures that were different. They were more landscape-based. They looked at different details. But they often had a quality of mystery. There was something, again, to use this kind of pregnant word in them. Some have a strange combination. Others are as simple as a reflection. But if it was something that stopped me for a second like this, I would make the picture. Something like this, you want to figure out what is this assemblage of an American school bus in Qatar? This was in Russia at a flea market at 7 a.m. This was everything this person had to sell, which to me, it goes back to the garbage that I was collecting before, and I loved this entire display. It looked like a Duchamp ready-made for me, and I tried to buy everything from the person, but they just said no. So I was struggling to figure out what to do with these pictures, how to hold them together. And again, there was a picture that taught me something. And often I'll have a picture that it's so important to me, if you have a picture that you're having a dialogue with, to make a print of it and to look at it and to let it look at you. And this, for me, was a picture like that. It's a beautiful picture of a lousy painting. But the quality of seeing light reflecting off of this thing, the light distracting you from what was actually being described, and that reflection being what actually gave me the feeling. And it made me feel like I want to work with a set of pictures that are about that. They're pictures, but they're not necessarily about what you see in them. They're about some other feeling that comes off of it. And again, there was a book that inspired me. William Steig made the book called The Lonely Ones in 1942. It's a tiny, tiny little book. This is William Steig. He was a very famous New Yorker cartoonist, and I got to meet him, and we had the traditional pranzo of watermelon and wine, which I guess is what all New Yorker cartoonists have. And this book, it's a book of cartoons, but they're for adults. People are no damn good. Public opinion no longer worries me. But I can mystify and terrify. And so eventually, I made my own book of The Lonely Ones. And I made it exactly the same size as the book before. And originally, I tried to work with his captions, but ultimately, I made my own captions. And it was the beginning of me trying to find a way to say more, to express more, and to almost peel away from the time and space that the photographs are attached to. If we think of those earlier photographs as being attached to New York City, Midtown Manhattan at a specific time, and they certainly, they're 20 years old now, they describe a specific moment in time in a way. With this body of work, I very much wanted to make pictures that were not as attached. So to use language. And the way the book is designed, you read a page of text, and then you open to reveal the photograph. We are here to make you happy. A change of heart. And appropriate for tonight, yes. So this was this small book that was sort of the next phase in my evolution of moving from really relying on the lives and the bodies of others and maybe pushing more into my own space to tell my stories, but still in union with the real world. still taking pictures that I had said yes to, moments I had said yes to, and then combining them with language to get to the next place. And then the nature of the development for me is to continue in that path, to try to find a way to be brave enough to express even more about my personal experience through the medium. I had a period in my life when my father was dying very slowly and my children were growing. And this moment of looking in two directions was one which I had no plans to do something, but because of who I am and how I live, part of how I breathe is through photography. So I'm always making pictures. Whatever my children are doing, there's pictures being made. I have the birthday pictures and the other pictures that are not the birthday pictures, the ones that I don't send to the grandmother. And I started looking at those pictures more, and then every time I would see my father, I would make a photograph. And so I started to think, how could I work with these two things? And I thought of a horse on the road and the blinders, right? That protect it from all the madness that's happening so that it can try to move forward. And I thought about the sonic experience, the sound of my children getting louder and louder, and the sound of my father getting softer and softer. So these two sounds, and then these two, both distractions and pleasure and pain, joys for me as I tried to move forward. And then there were two works of art that really spoke to me. This is a piece by Felix Gonzalez Torres. It's just two analog clocks next to each other. It's a relationship, trying to be in sync, and the improbability of keeping two clocks in sync, and the tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock of that sound. And then this piece by Robert Frank, which I was lucky enough to see for the first time in real life. I remember the exact wall in Washington, D.C. And I loved Robert Frank. I loved the work from the street. And then the later work was more challenging for me. But when I saw this piece, which is, it's this big, it's tiny. And it's, you know, the loss of his daughter. And then this negative space. The pictures that he never got to make is what it felt like to me. And then this very visceral experience on top of it of language. And making a relic, not just of what had happened, but what had not happened. So with these different influences and this very conscious idea of a sonic experience, I moved forward to create a book called Family Car Trouble, which is here. And the device of the language, this simple idea of family car trouble, family car trouble, to play with language and to see how it pivots on this word, and that there's some humor to it, but there's also a tension there. And the strategy that I felt was strong was to design the book to look like a novel, because I knew I wanted the pictures to be read. This was not going to be a project about singular great pictures, not a decisive moment, not a cracker perfect street photo, but a set of pictures that were like landmarks that took you through an experience. Some of them small, some of them big, but to work with the humblest material, the smallest things that are the fabric of everyday life. And it's a story that very much has three-part structure. A beginning, a middle, and an end. And it plays with time. The introduction to the characters, and then the life of play. These two girls playing, doing whatever they can to play. learning to have all of their five senses be a part of their life, and at the same time witnessing my father losing his senses, no longer able to speak, to taste, and looking in these two directions at the same time. This was an attempt to make a passport picture of my daughter. So the traditional portrait would be the official passport picture, but in some ways it speaks to how photography is in our life. But obviously seeing my arm in there as well, you know, and on the page before you see my arm with the same sweater that was a part of that time. So I had made a huge shift from making pictures that are almost always 12 feet away from me to then working 12 inches, 20 inches, to looking at life that was super close. And then the car. You know, if I said the book was, you know, my dying father and my beautiful children, not so compelling. Really needing this trinity of three things. And this car as a metaphor. And it's not a metaphor for one thing. It can stand in for many things, but in American culture it certainly has many meanings. And particularly a Volvo station wagon has a specific meaning. So the way the children play around it and use it. But then in this 8-month period, my car got towed 7 times. And every time I was alone. And so I leaned into this use of the car with my family. Because the car was something I could control. I could fix that problem. I could throw soldi at the car to get it back on the road. But my father and my children, I had less control over. And the moments I pay attention to and that I use in the project are the in-between moments. This is what I'm saying yes to here. I'm trying to validate the quotidian parts of what we do. It's not the peak moment, it's all the little things that we do to make it to the end of the day. And then the trouble really came. All the lights on the dashboard. And sometimes I wish in life we had a dashboard like this that said time to rest, time to call your mother, time to pay taxes. And then the response to this trauma. This is from the last visit to see my father. Which coincided with my grandmother's 100th birthday. So the picture on the right was us visiting the grandmother who's turning 100 while my father is on the last days. And here we have the clock again. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It's a little different in Italian. You have more oil, I think. And preparing to say goodbye. And there's this little man in a paraglider. It's like an Antonioni moment, you know, and my daughter just raising to wave as this little red parachute slides by. And here we have red again. It's like the red lights on the dashboard, and now we have this red light that they put on my father, I don't know why, to make him look less dead or to make it easier. And then we grieve. And we try to move forward. This is really the main garage. I never felt lucky when I was at Lucky's garage. And while most of the book is from the last 8 months of my father's life, the last little set of pictures goes a few years because it takes time. So this is at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, which is a beautiful, beautiful cemetery. It's older than Central Park and has been used like a park for almost 200 years. And the car that gave me all this trouble along the way, trouble that I chose, trouble that I could control, at the end rises to the occasion and it holds us, you know, with me driving and with my wife as the navigator next door, and the children restoring, and the wind moving. And then ultimately, we end at the sea. You know, I've said to many people today, like all the great Fellini films, we end at the sea. Grazie. Grazie, grazie. Basta,
Joel.
basta. We need Joel.
Joel, cosa...
Andiamo. We have to go.
Joel, cosa dici?
Joel, what do you think? What do you say? Can you say a few words about this work? And can you also then show us how you try to say yes to things through photography?
Yes, that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here to share some ideas about Gus and his work and about why we say yes and what it means. So I feel that Gus Powell is one of the new poets of photography, someone who's inventing a new way of looking at photographs and using them in a way that makes them more accessible. I mean, often we have captions underneath a photograph to explain it to us. That's what magazines have taught us over the years. But Gus is showing you that you don't need captions, that you can put together ideas in the form of photographs, and that you can use humble images. These aren't great classic masterpieces such as Cartier-Bresson would make. These are images that are made around the intimacy of his life, about the resources that are necessary, raising children, seeing a parent through their illness, walking them towards their death by holding their hand and loving them. He's showing us that we can find a new form, a new poetic and literary form for photography. And I think he's making groundbreaking work. And I say that from a perspective of a photographer who's tried to put together bodies of work myself, but in a non-storytelling way. They're about the moments that I did say yes to the world, ways that I've learned to be more open-minded and affirmative about the things I see, as if I can pool them together over time and create a flexible meaning so that anyone looking at the book will be able to translate the images into ideas that are held together without a narrative, but by the inner meanings that we might all bring to these moments in time. And Gus is using that, but he is absolutely focused on something that was intimate and important to him. Not just things in the world at large, but the things that we live with and carry on as memory in this way. And I feel that he is really one of the leaders of his generation at this point in reinventing the photographic book as an idea. He is open-hearted, open-minded, unafraid to be emotional, and yet he finds a form that is simple and subtle. And it almost looks as if there's no photographic art involved in the making of this picture. And yet it sustains itself, image after image, page after page. I've looked at this book more than 20 times. Sometimes I walk by the shelf and I see it on the shelf and I just pull it out and I sit down with it. And I live with Gus as he's watching his children grow and his father die. And I always put the book away with a kind of a choked up feeling, an emotional feeling, as if once again, these pictures, which I know well, have worked their magic on me. That is an incredibly difficult, demanding, and rare thing to do with a book of photographs. Most of the time, we look at picture books, and you turn the pictures and you never have to look at them again. One shot is all they are, and they don't hold a place in our memory or our hearts. And so I celebrate the accomplishments that Gus has grown into and his efforts to redefine what photographic meaning is, and to show us all another form, a personal, private form of saying yes.
Grazie, Joel. Thanks.
So what is this yes? I've assembled a small group of pictures here from lots of my work in which I felt, I went through the work looking for where's the yes, because there always are other reasons alongside the yes. But if I turn to the pictures that taught me how to believe in my own instinct, they added up to yes. So I'm going to show you a handful of pictures because really I would like Gus and I to have a conversation and for all of you to participate in the conversation. So I will run through these pictures quickly. Not so quickly that you don't get them, but quick enough. So I started in 1962, and The very first film I put in my camera was Kodachrome, because I thought the world was in color, and that's what I had to make photographs of. And I was, as Gus said about himself, I was timid. I didn't know how to get close. You know, in a case like this, there's a window between me and them, and I observe this couple, young lovers, and she's fixing his hair so that when they take the picture together, it'll look right. But the moment and the gesture and his catching me and a slight bit of worry on his face, I realized I'm safe. I'm outside the window. He's not going to come after me. And like Gus, I too had to learn how to get close to people without disturbing them, without frightening them or making them upset or angry with me. So one develops a positive attitude, a way of being present in somebody else's space, but not challenging them or threatening them, acknowledging that they are important to me, something that they offer, their spirit, their integrity, their beauty, their mystery. These are things that required a yes and courage. How close can I get to another human being in a public space and have the yes be something we agree on? Sometimes pictures offer themselves that don't need any explanation. They pose a question and a mystery. And the photographer's job, his or her reason for being, is to witness these junctions, these connections, and see in them a potential meaning or reading of the whole social scene. To see this white man standing next to this black man with a big dog, and the white man has taken off his hat to cover his heart because the American flag has gone by. But from my point of view, I see a kind of racial charge there with a sense of humor under it, a kind of acceptance of our differences. But I got the big dog. So there's sometimes a joke and there's sometimes a gesture. And in this case, I said yes to this gesture of this little girl leaning on the edge of the window, looking out with almost a cry or pain on her face. But my whole being leaped to her attention. Click, image, yes. Because yes is a validation. Yes says yes to life. Yes says yes to our instinct. Because photography is all instinct, isn't it? You can walk around with a camera all day and never have a feeling that anything is important. Or you can walk around and suddenly things happen in front of you because you are already in the yes mode. You're welcoming the riches and mysteries of the world. And sometimes it happens right in front of you. Baciami stupido on New Year's Eve. How lucky was I? It's something that somebody might want to set up, but to find it was a gift. So here's something that might be painful. We don't know the story here. But that outstretched hand by the man and the fearful crying face of the girl pose all kinds of mysteries. And seeing it through one window and another window and seeing her framed against the car, it made me feel how boxed in she was, how trapped in a way. And yet it was probably the most innocent thing. He's saying, come on, honey, we have to go home. And she's saying, no, I want ice cream, or who knows why. But to me, the potential meaning, the ambiguity of the meaning is the thing that makes me say yes. Because we can't affirm anything in the pictures that we make. It's all open-ended. There really is no meaning. We attribute some meaning to it. And that attribution of meaning is what teaches a photographer how to continue saying yes in the face of the ordinariness of life. How do you know what it is that you want? How do you know how it's going to make sense later on? I think photography is about asking questions, not only saying yes, but asking questions about how the medium itself works, how it describes the events we see in front of us. Sometimes they're ridiculous. What is this woman doing? Who is she doing it for? I felt, well, look at this. I've stepped into a theatrical moment with the Grand Canyon as the background, and this crazy lady, fitting herself in. How could I not say yes to that? But then life offers some lessons too. I mean, to be on a street in Paris where someone has fallen and a crowd of people stands around, not one person has moved to help that fallen man. The photograph is more about that lack of humanity. I mean, I'm grateful that a man with a hammer happened to come by to step over a fallen man. So the implications are more of a story. But the real tragedy isn't that he's on the ground, it's that no one has come to his aid. If I hadn't said yes to this moment, then I wouldn't have understood something about what contemporary life in cities does to us. It dumbs us down. It makes us, it hardens us in some way. So this is, to me, a description of that kind of hardness. Even here in a barrio in Spain, a real slum, children are out playing. There are too many of them in each house. There's no room. The gypsies that I was living with lived 19 people in 4 rooms. But when I looked outside their window, here were these kids playing in the dirt, having the ballet of life be part of their enjoyment. Their rhythm was beauty to me, beauty amidst this kind of horrible way of living. I find this picture to be an incredibly tender photograph for me. It's one I'd like to talk through for a moment. We'll skip through most of the rest of them, but this is in Turkey. And as I walk through the street, I see this half man, no legs, sitting on his pad. And the little boy is washing the man's hands. What I saw, though, was not just the boy doing that, but look at the boy's knees. The boy has locked his knees together so that he can hold the spout of the jug and pour a thin stream of drops on the man's hand without splashing water on the man's clothing. This is a gesture of such kindness and thoughtfulness, of such regard for this half man. I thought of it as a tender mercy that he was offering. And I was in a state of wonder and joy. I only made this one photograph of it, but it has stayed with me for my entire working life. That this moment of beauty, this tenderness, was so spiritual a moment. I was glad I had the courage and the sense of appropriateness to say yes to this. So to move on through my life, as Gus did with his, at a certain point, I was traveling in Europe for a year. And when you travel, sometimes things happen that there's no going back for. And so I photographed out of my car. Wherever I went, whatever I saw, I kept on photographing it as the images appeared. And I probably had 2,000 photographs made from a moving car. And when I returned to New York City, I was at that time 29 years old, I showed these pictures to John Charkovsky, who was the director of the Museum of Modern Art. And he said, let's make a show. I was thrilled because I was doing something that was very risky. To drive a car and take photographs at the same time is slightly crazy. But I worked out how to do it. And those yeses came up so suddenly at 100 kilometers an hour. I was saying yes, yes to things that happened in front of me and disappeared simultaneously. This was for me pure photographic response. Only the camera could capture these disappearing moments of intense feeling and trust that there was an image there that was worthy of holding on to and remembering. So we enter here just a few photographs of black and white and color of almost the same picture. You today have no doubt about using color. So try to imagine a time when color was thought of as only for amateurs or for commercial purposes or for reportage. It wasn't acceptable as an artwork. And I wanted to prove to the people in power that color could make a good argument against black and white, that if photography is about description, color describes more things. And so I went about proving this, and I have maybe 200 pairs of images in which there's a color and black and white picture. And next year at Tate Modern Museum in London, I'll have an exhibition of this early work. These are all from 1963 to 69 or 70. So in a way, my yes then was yes to my own instinct that color was a valuable language of photography, and that it was my responsibility to make a convincing argument to the people in the museum world, the authorities, that we could go this way. So I'm just going to run through the rest so that we have some time. But along the way, I think you'll see that there are moments in which, by having a camera in my hand and by observing life, there are moments when there are transcendent beauties in the most ordinary places. In 1974, I went through a big transition. I didn't want to shoot color and black and white any longer. I only wanted to shoot in color. And by doing that, I had to change my behavior on the street because I wanted not just an action in the frame, but I wanted the entirety of the frame, the furthest point in the sky, the nearest point to me on the street, and everything in between. And I wanted it sharp and in color, and I wanted to blow it up to 2 meters or more to make photographs that were like life itself. And so I gave up the incident. I gave up the incident to try to make this overall thing. And at a certain point, I thought, you know what? I need more description. That 35 millimeter wasn't good enough. And so I switched to a large format, 20 by 25 centimeter wooden camera to make pictures in which there would be all of this depth of space that I wanted. And that would allow me to look at simple things. And at the very beginning of this work in 1976, I noticed that a lot of these photographs took place as the daylight faded and the blue hour came on. Because that's a time when we don't actually see the same way as in daylight. Details become smothered in the oncoming darkness. But the view camera can save this, can describe this, can bring us all the detail. And so I found a whole new vocabulary for myself, and I found a new way of saying yes, whether it was a landscape or a portrait. Excuse me. I was acting in a different time frame. It wasn't a 35 millimeter camera at a 250th of a second, but it was this big wooden box making pictures that sometimes lasted 2, 3, 5 seconds long. And by changing this mechanism that I used, I opened myself up to whole other ways of looking at the world, at portraiture, at landscapes, at still lifes. I found that I had more interest in a larger body of work than I ever had before, and that I had to find new approaches and new tactics. I had to develop a new way of being in order to reach into these different ideas. So this is the last body of work I'm only showing you a few pictures of. For nearly 20 years, I had a studio in Manhattan. This was my view out of my studio window, unobstructed view from the photography district on 19th Street, all the way down to the World Trade Center. And for years, I photographed the World Trade Center as if it was a landscape of mountains in the distance. And then one day, they fell down. And I decided as a New Yorker that I wanted to do something to be of service to my community, because the mayor, Rudy Giuliani, had banned photography. He said, no photographs allowed. And I thought, you fascist, you can't do that to us. This is America, and we need a record of this, and I'm going to figure out how to get in there. And I did. In New Yorkese, we say chutzpah. Gus could explain that to you. It's an expression which means, no, I won't say it, but you got to do what you got to do. And I forced my way in there, and I spent 9 months photographing inside Ground Zero, and it was the most powerful, life-changing, spiritual experience to me. I saw unbelievable things, and I can say to you here, in this photograph, early on, it was I had a momentary crisis of what to do. It was a October day, and the sun was strong on my back. I felt that warmth on me, and the joyousness of a blue sky, white cloud day, and these buildings wrapped in red nylon cloth. And I thought, this is so incredibly beautiful. And at that very same moment that I said beautiful to myself, I realized I'm standing in a cemetery. There are 1,900 dead people here. What right do I have to witness this as being beautiful? And then I thought, I have every right. I'm making the record. And we need beauty in our lives to affirm the fact that time moves us further and further away from every event that happens. It moves us further away from the death of our loved ones. It moves us further away from tragedy. It keeps on moving us into the present future so that we can keep saying yes to life, to being alive, to celebrating all the positive things of life. So I made the photograph, and I learned once again that it is important to feel yourself upright, clear-headed, open-eyed, positive about the world, and saying yes. Thank you all very much.
Grazie Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you so very, very much. Now, I'd like to ask you something, a question to both of you. So, Gus, I have the impression that we are talking about photography, and so how you make photographs, and Joel, explain how, the change of tool can influence the result. But not only that. So my feeling is that we're also talking about something else. You say that the final result is not sometimes the most interesting thing of your job. And today, we said that often when we talk about photography, we realize that actually we're talking about something else, about something that goes beyond photography. So, can you elaborate a bit on this, please?
So, I was in college, I thought I would be an art major. But when I started taking these classes in the art department, it was such a postmodern moment that it was all work being done from the mind and not from the heart. And I started taking these religion classes. So I ended up, really by accident, being a comparative religion major. And it was really because these students, mostly in these mystical poetry classes, I was really into the mystics and the mystic traditions, but these students were really trying to understand themselves and to look for role models in different ways and to move forward. And in terms of thinking about different religions and the nature of existence, I got very attached to the idea of thinking about ground, path, and goal. Each religion, whether the religion is a big religion or money, love, economics, whatever it is that you believe in, there is a ground, there is your understanding of the nature of existence, there is a goal, enlightenment for you, enlightenment for all, heaven, and then there's a path to get from how we live to where we think we want to go. And it's this path, that's where we spend our life. So even in the ambition to make photographs, and to make great photographs, the time spent on the path is the part that means the most to me. The time that I'm the happiest and that I feel engaged with the world and with myself the most is when I'm making those pictures, when I'm pressing the button. And for me, it's Joel brought this up a little bit before, and many photographers talk about it in different ways. The camera, Diane Arbus kind of talked about the camera as being a license to go into different places and into different lives. Others have talked about it as a responsibility in some way. Sometimes I've thought of the camera as this compass, or the feelings that I use, the intuitions I used to go across the path through daily life are very much guided by trying to see things with as much of my abilities as possible, and often it's the camera that helps me to put that into tune and to look closer. And it's something I talk about with my students a lot. If you have a moment and there's just a little part of you that wants to take a picture of something, to blow on that like an ember and to approach that. Because there's two things happening. One, you're learning to see and to react to the world around you, to really read the space that's around you, not just in terms of making a photograph, but in terms of seeing what the life around you is. And then two, you're listening to yourself. You're listening to your own feelings and your own intuitions. And those two things have to come together, to look at the world around you and then to pay attention to who you are, what you bring to it, with your strengths and your faults, and how those two things are going to be what gets you to the next point in your life. And for me, that's where photography has been this tool to help me to focus, to pay more attention to the world around me, for anything about it that could be compelling, and then to pay attention to my own feelings about it, which can be good feelings and bad feelings, true feelings and false feelings. But the union of those two, which is, it is not about an objective view of any of this. It's about a subjective view of the world and a subjective view of myself. But through this tool, this little lens that has two holes, one for me to look through and one for the world to come in. And then it makes this thing. I used to love shooting chrome because the chrome itself, when you took that piece of Kodachrome, it was in the camera. It was with you that day in Times Square when you made that photograph, and you put it into the slide projector, and you push light through it, and you animate this little piece of gelatin, and you bring it back to life. It's a relic of light, but it's a relic of you being there and something that happened. And that whole experience of making something out of nothing, even if it doesn't come together, that act of taking these steps on the path is my favorite part of being a photographer. And a lot of what I'm saying, you don't need a camera. You know, all of this could be applied to other methods and modes of navigating the world. I think we each choose a system to understand the world and hopefully to make an impact on the world. Whether that impact is simply to get food on the table or to make relationships. You know, here, I love that this is not a conference, this is the meeting. The currency here is interaction between human beings face to face, having contact. And it's incredibly compelling. I'm sliding away from the initial question, but it's talking about my own experience as a photographer, which is what has brought me here today, too, and relates to the conversations I've had. So kind of a long answer, but it speaks to this. The key for me is this union of revealing oneself as you try to discover the world, and the two have to happen together. And that's how I believe you move forward towards a goal.
Joel, per te anche.
Joel, same question for you. So is the most important thing the process?
Given a really lovely and full answer. And what I would add to it from my perspective is that photography was a tool for me to reach moments of consciousness. One doesn't actually need a camera to have these states of consciousness where you understand who you are and what you're seeing, and you integrate these two things into yourself at that moment, and you will feel more alive at that moment than at any other time. And so what I really wanted through the medium of photography was to attain a more familiar way of arriving at consciousness, which is a state of freedom, in a way. One sees the world around them, I see the world around me, and I have a stream of feelings and understanding at the same time. And I find that uplifting. It's as if I have I've peeled away whatever is over my eyes that prevents me from knowing, and suddenly I see with a kind of clarity. Photography has been the tool that has brought me into that place in my life. But I don't think I would have arrived there. Well, one could never know. But I don't think I could have arrived there without the assistance of this mechanical device that has proven to me hundreds of thousands of times that my instinct for observing humanity was getting clearer and clearer, and I'm understanding more about what living means. So I use it in that way as something to open me up to being present in the moment and understanding more clearly who I am in the world that I live in.
Grazie mille, grazie.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much.
Sarebbe bello.
It would be great to have enough time to go on. There would be so many things I'd like to ask you. Unfortunately, we have to end up our conference. I don't want to add anything. And I think that what you said spoke so clearly to anybody here, even those who are not professionals and simply like to take snaps with their smartphone. So maybe next time they will think about some of the things you said. Thank you, Joel, so much for this gift you made to all of us. And we hope to bring you to Rimini as soon as possible. Your pictures has already come, so you are the only one missing. Thank you very, very much, Gus, as well. Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Those who got to know him could experience, the great gift he has also made to us. Is going to be with us until Tuesday evening, is going to keep talking and explaining the exhibition. So thank you to both of you. And these moments are possible thanks to the people who are contributing to the meeting. So please don't forget to make your donation, because this event is possible thanks also to you. Thank you very much and have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.